The killing of George Floyd. The historical event based on diversity that I would like to study throughout this course is the murder of George Floyd. This event caused an astonishing reaction throughout the world. It was seemingly the first time a police officer was held accountable for his crimes. The event led to Officer Derek Chauvin being found guilty of murder and manslaughter in the death of George Floyd. The event took place on May 25th, 2020, when Floyd was arrested shortly after 8 p.m. after allegedly using a fake $20 bill at a local Cup Foods. The event took place in Minneapolis, Minnesota. A terrifying cell phone video later posted to Facebook shows an officer pining Floyd's neck while a handcuffed man repeats, "I can't breathe," and goes unconscious. He later dies at the hospital. The video then goes viral. On May 26th, the officers were fired as protests started. Civil rights attorney Ben Crump announces he is representing Floyd's family and will seek justice. The 4 officers involved in Floyd's death are fired. Demonstrators gather at the 3rd Precinct and the site of the incident in what becomes the first night of protests in Minneapolis. On May 27th, demonstrators in different cities, including Los Angeles and Memphis, start to march in anger over the death of Floyd. Meanwhile, in Minneapolis, peaceful protests turn violent as fires and looting break out and cops attempt to disperse crowds with rubber bullets and tear gas. On May 29th, Derek Chauvin, the officer seen in the video kneeling on Floyd's neck, is arrested and charged with 3rd-degree manslaughter in Floyd's death. If convicted, maximum penalties for all of the charges are severe: 40 years in prison for 2nd-degree murder, 25 years for 3rd-degree murder, and 10 years for the manslaughter charge. On June 8th, Democrats introduced policing reform bill. Congressional Democrats introduced a sweeping police misconduct reform bill called the Justice and Policing Act that would look into demilitarize the police and address police brutality. Measures include banning chokeholds and no-knock warrants. The problem that occurred on the day of George Floyd's death was because Derek Chauvin decided to pin down George Floyd's neck using his knee. It was obvious from the footage that Floyd was having a panic attack or anxiety attack, likely due to the fentanyl in his system. The usual approach to this would be a trip to the emergency room to be checked out. However, Chauvin decided that forcing his entire body weight on Floyd's neck was the prime solution. There was an enormous impact on the organization due to the events that transpired on May 25th, 2020 in Minneapolis. Millions of people across the United States of America and the world demonstrated their disapproval of the acts against George Floyd. Protesters are asking for police reform. Others are genuinely distressed over the loss of another unarmed African American due to police brutality. The death of George Floyd was not the first incident where Derek Chauvin expressed his violent behavior. According to The Sun, Chauvin and 5 other officers shot and killed a man who had stabbed his girlfriend and a friend. In 2008, Derek was reportedly involved in an altercation with an individual suspected of a domestic dispute in which Chauvin shot the man twice. The man luckily survived. In 2011, Chauvin was placed on a 3-day leave along with 4 other officers for his involvement in the non-fatal shooting of an indigenous man. The officers were invited back to work after it was decided that they responded to the situation appropriately. 5 additional complaints that were made against Chauvin prior to 2012 have also been closed and resulted in no disciplinary action. In 2020, Milan Mason, a retired Minneapolis police officer and a police and training expert, told NBC News the number of grievances against Chauvin in his 19 years on the police force is a little bit higher than normal. The 3 other fired officers who assisted in Floyd's arrest, J. Alexander Keegan, Thomas Lane, and Tu Tao, were scheduled to be tried in August on charges of aiding and abetting murder and manslaughter. According to The Guardian, Tao faced legal action in 2017 due to a man who claimed Tao used excessive force during an arrest 3 years prior. According to the lawsuit, which was settled out of court, Lamar Ferguson, age 26, said the officers punched, kicked, and kneed him to the face and body while he was handcuffed. The police assault caused broken teeth as well as other bruising and trauma. The other 2 officers were relative newcomers to the department at the time of Floyd's death. Lane was a former juvenile detention guard who did volunteer work with Somali refugees. King got his start in law enforcement by patrolling his college campus and a department store. Even over the George Floyd incident, the Minneapolis Police Department tried to cover it up. Police tried to send out a press release that was titled, "Man Dies After Medical Incident During Police Interaction." But unlike the times of Floyd's predecessors, there are cameras everywhere. The mayhem caused by the Minneapolis Police Department is not new at all. 17 years before the Chauvin and Floyd interaction, there was a horrific incident involving a 25-year-old black man and Minneapolis police officers. The 25-year-old accused the officers of sodomizing him with the handle of a toilet plunger during an arrest. Unfortunately, there was no social media or smartphones to bring the terrible tales to light. There was a lengthy 8-month-long investigation by the U.S. Justice Department that resulted in no criminal charges against the white officers. After the case was closed, the white police chief and white mayor of Minneapolis, R.T. Ryback, threw a joyous press conference. The mayor called it one of the happiest press conferences he had ever attended when the results were announced. The officer behind the monstrous act, Jeffrey Ginda, had a lengthy list of complaints and lawsuits for excessive use of force during his career. In a case involving Ginda, the city had to pay out $110,000 to a murder suspect over brutality, alleging the officer kicked him while handcuffed. The assault caused his jaw to be broken in several places, which required metal plates to be inserted, according to the Star Tribune of Minneapolis. Several individuals across the United States have agreed that there should be a separate task force or entity that specializes in mental health situations, depending on the severity of the situation. In George Floyd's situation, it was a minor dispute over a fake $20 bill. George most likely felt intimidated by the police surrounding him, and it might have freaked him out. In a situation like this, there could have been a group of people who can speak with him to calm him down so he can discuss the counterfeit bill situation. If Floyd was in a mental state where he could not discuss the events that were taking place, then they could bring him somewhere to calm him down until he sobers up. Justice teams, an alternative to police in a mental health situation believe the police use force for every situation which does not help in a mental health crisis. On their website, it states this is a problem because police are not trained to be social workers or crisis counselors. Many of them do not want to engage with this population, and an armed police officer responding to someone in a crisis can be very triggering, escalating situations rapidly and far too often with deadly results. There are only a few cities across the country that have this alternative option for mental health crisis. There must be other options other than violence. When a person who is under the influence of drugs, they are much more paranoid, and if they see a lot of cops with guns antagonizing him, of course their mental state will turn aggressive. If there had been a task force immediately sent to assist with such a minor offense of using a counterfeit $20 bill by an individual under the influence of drugs, the situation would have happened extremely differently. Most likely they would have had Floyd calm down before they confronted him about the fake money. If the situation escalated, they could have taken him somewhere to relax and clear his mind. If there had been a task force for the situation in place in Minneapolis, George Floyd would likely still be alive. Unfortunately, individuals with underlying mental illness are disproportionately attacked by police, especially if the individual is Black, brown, or